A world of fantasy. A world of adventure. A world of gaming. A world of novels. Welcome to the world of Fantasia. Tonight, however, on this holy day of Fantasia's birthday, I'm going to talk about the novels, specifically the War of the Dragonlords, the saga of the High Crystal Council, and the chronicles of Fantasia. It was on this date, 1 year ago, that I released the first novel formally, although it had been seen by others over the years. This was the official release. And having already completed the next 5, completing the story of the war to its conclusion, I considered the release dates for the rest of them. Would have been very simple to release them 1 per year. They're already written, there's a release date. I could Lord of the Rings it for twice as long. However, there's not a great demand for my books, primarily because very few people know about them, and I'm not really making an effort to market them. Instead, as this story began, and I will tell the tale, I just wanted this to be what Fantasia is at its heart: fun. In its essence, it is fantasy, not marketability. I take this journey on like a hobbit, not a dwarf, not an elf, not even a wizard. I don't have any other motives except that which makes hearth and home all the more comfortable and livable. That is the magic of Fantasia, truly. As Professor Tolkien knew a century ago, and many others have discovered in their own ways, myself included, throughout time immemorial. In my case, my story, with these novels, I thought, well, you got them. Put them out there. Why not? People will discover them on their own journey, in their own time. Why hold them back? To be fanciful? So I could act like a big shot? No, that's not my way. The stories exist, they're there. There's an adventure to be had if people want it. And that's really all you need to know. If you like fantasy, adventure, and in this day and age of so many choices of the genre, what's one more? Well, one more is one more artist's style, and maybe it'll be to your liking and maybe it won't. Maybe you like the House of Dragons, or the Game of Thrones, or whatever the latest thing is. But if you like a War of Dragonlords, well, Maybe you'll like that, maybe you won't. What does that mean? Nothing so clumsy as its exoteric title. Dragon means one who sees. It's more of a chess game between wizards, of which the player characters in the adventuring party are the pieces. The quests of the novels are really just at their heart, in their essence, a role-playing game adventure in its true form. It's meant to be fun. It can be dramatic. Novels or games or any other sort of fantasy adventure fun can be of any genre, drama, comedy, cultural anthropology, history, philosophy, archaeology. There's so much you can explore. But at its heart, what keeps it all to the force that binds my universe together is a sense of fun. Otherwise, why are we here on the adventure of life? Noisy people. The Shire's all ruckin' and rollickin' tonight. But that's okay, I have plenty of pipeweed to tell my tale. Bring it on, you noisies. You big herd of elephants, or whatever. I always felt like a hobbit, getting back to my story. And that 32 years ago, when I first began to, really conceive of Fantasia, I didn't get my growth spurt till after high school. I spent my introverted high school years not dating, but drawing maps and early layouts of the world. And January of 91, at the age of 16 and a half, I began drafting the first pages of what would become book one of a saga of stories that, of all the elements of life they encapsulate and explore, their overall title, Fantasia, imagination. It's me. It's my heart that I share with you all. A sense of fun, of adventure, of childhood, of being a hobbit in a big ugly world that you'd rather just stay indoors, stay at home, stay in your hobbit hole. I have since gone on the big adventure. I have been there and back again. Which brings me back again to these books. I originally started drafting them 32 years ago. 31 and many bits there. Change. I wrote books 1 through 6 between 1991 and 1995 and registered them with copyright as such. In the late 90s, I revised them, transferring them from my old Amiga dot matrix Commodore Amiga to Microsoft Word, a much more applicable format when you want to print them. Can't take your Commodore Amiga dot matrix to FedEx Kinko's. or self-publishing in these days. So I rewrote them and began a greater journey, realizing how much more improved they could be. And instead of just transferring the text, I improved it greatly. And there the novels sat for decades until 2014, when, after I had been there and back again, and many sequels, I had the life experience to really improve them. And I rewrote them again. And that is the version that is now available. An adventure over 31 years in the making, and time immemorial indeed, if you consider the age of my soul, and all that I truly draw from, the true source of my imagination, my heart that I share with you all, my Kyber North Crystal Star, my Fantasia. Now, let us go on the quest. As a wise old man once said, where to begin? Ah, yes. And, once upon a long time ago, in a hobbit house not so far away, a great brainstorming took place. I discovered Lord of the Rings in the late 80s, and like every gamer, had to make my own. So in addition to drawing maps and house rules and everything else that goes into world building, as it's now known, never having any thought of publication, I simply wanted, in regards to the game, to make a more playable game to my sentiments than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition was allowing for amongst my adolescent Goonies gamer crew. But that was just my day job, my exoteric deal with the real world, so-called. What was more important, what lie within the esoteric, was reading those books by Professor Tolkien and really falling in love with that world, as have so many others. And not just Middle-earth specifically, though, but the feeling of that world. The tone of that world. With all the noise outside versus getting your house in order inside. As much as I grew up, well, I didn't really grow up, as much as I spent my younger days with such wild adventures as Star Wars and many other things set in space and other genres than fantasy, when I discovered Dragon's Lair in the Dark Crystal in the early 80s, it was a major change. It was a seasonal change in my life. No, it was moving. It was a migration. It was a tonal shift. It was a great conjunction. Fantasy always appeals to me, and perhaps it does for others, because it has that back to a simpler time. We want escapism in the first place because the world is complex and nasty and ugly, and one person doesn't ever really make a difference. It's just a big ugly mess out there, isn't it? Or as Peter S. Beagle wrote in the foreword to the Lord of the Rings edition that I was reading back in the day, the special Silver Jubilee edition. He said that Tolkien created a green alternative to every day's madness here in a poisoned world. Very good way to describe it. In science fiction and space stuff, you have to know so much tech stuff. Technobabble, Techno-Babylon. Technically, you're all in Babylon all over again. Big seasonal cycle of civilization, if you want to call it that, so-called civilization. Fantasy offers that alternative where, as Tolkien said, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And that is also the appeal of Star Wars, really. Those that say it's not science fiction, it's space opera. No, it's space fantasy. Because he believes Luke Skywalker, one person, can make the difference. Destroying the Death Star, casting the ring in the fire, what's the difference? In terms of the tone of the story, the true purpose of why you're attracted to it. And there in the classic medieval fantasy setting helps much better than the space setting. That's why more people get that feeling out of medievalism than they do spacism. Because it's back to the earth. It requires more faith, because there's the absence of technology encourages you to look within. It's more natural, and well, it is more natural. Too much technology. I think Tolkien has a profound statement or two about that. Not that technology is bad. I'm using it to publish my books and communicate with whoever's listening to this. And you are welcome here in my world. Fantasia means see what you want to see, or see what you see. Maybe it's not what you want, but it's, as Tolkien would talk about, applicability. Fantasia is really a stylized euphemism for applicability. It's a medieval version. It's the people in the world's way of saying that, to see it however you see it. That's why I don't like hard and fast rules, and or I don't like too many detailed technical rules in the game. And I don't have politics in the novels. It's more about, and I don't explain how magic works. It's left to your interpretation, so you can personalize it and make it more your world. This is my world. This is my work, if you will, my labor of love, but it has been designed for everyone else to make of it what they will and have fun. Lead on, adventurer. Your quest awaits. Your journey. My books, sure, my novels, my hard work. Labor of love. But the books, as all of Fantasia, are designed to, like any good story, from Tolkien's work to the best Hollywood movies we all love, Something I explained to people at film school and they didn't get it. If you look at all the beloved stories out there, whether they were artificially pushed or filtered or not, the ones people tend to love, all have one thing in common. They allow you to be a tourist in a better world than the one you have to get up and go to work to. They give you a chance to go somewhere else. The most popular franchises are not based on the story or the characters, but the setting. All those other ingredients are part of the setting. They're part of that world. The characters are people in that better world that we want to hang out with because they make the world better by them being in it. Any cast of characters, any ensemble, whether it's in a movie or a play or a novel or a story or a legend of any kind, they're a surrogate family. They're your friends that don't do you wrong. Just like fantasy itself is a better world than we want, so are the people. It's an idealized form of reality. It's something we should strive to. And since people fall short in reality, so-called, the fantasy genre, that tour through another world, gives us not just a green alternative to everyday's madness physically. Like, don't, burn down the forest or the tree ants wake up and get angry. But even the people. The fellowship are pretty tight. Boy, I wish I had people like that in my life. That many. I have a couple. I guess I got it, everyone, if you got a Samwise in your life, you're good. But whole fellowship would be better. That's nice, and that's why we like stories like this. You have the world's better, your friends are better, and if the world's going to get worse, you all alone can stop it. Since no one else out there listens to you, you can make all the difference. And even physics is better. Magic works. Miracles happen. And though monsters are real, they can be overcome. Therein lies the problems that can be dealt with rather than so-called reality. I say that meaning so-called priority. No, it's much more fun to slay a dragon than to take on the corporate boardroom, isn't it? Wouldn't you rather prepare yourself for a night of gaming or reading a book, facing down Smaug, getting comfortable with your favorite snacks and smokes and drinks and such, rather than having to get made up and prepare a presentation for a bunch of stuffy suits that aren't going to listen or understand? The appeal of fantasy, I may be laboring a bit, but I'm just getting warmed up. I'm indulging myself here as a proper hobbit should. Or wizard, I guess I'm a bit of both. Let's do some alchemy. Now, the novels of Fantasia. What I set out to write was honest. Meaning I didn't set out to publish them. I didn't set out to write them for any audience. I didn't set out to make money. I thought about things like that here and there, who doesn't, but they weren't on my mind. I was just writing them for the fun of writing them. I really was, and that sounds like Tolkien. I think we just think alike. Simple. We both like our pipe weed, too, don't we? Haha. and the brewing of ale, and food. A simple life. It is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life. I've learned that lesson. I've been places, Illuminati Hollywood, Masonic lodges, Stargates. I've had my adventures. I've dealt with my flies and spiders, my trolls and golems and dragons, precious. I just want to write I have written my book. And it's not just red. It's all 6 colors of the rainbow. Actually, book 1 is orange. It's about basic magic. Music, if you will. That's why the first song in it is about singing. It's how the cosmos was created. As Tesla said, frequency and vibration. As the Bible says, God spoke, said, let there be light. Said, let there be light. It's funny how lightning precedes thunder, but not in creation. I'll figure that one out. You sure we're on the right side of the mirror, mirror universe here? I mean, it's a pretty broken universe. Magic's all but Magic's all but out of business. People are as naive to the supernatural as they are to science. I mean, have you taken your proper medications today? And I'll leave it at that. Nothing over my food. You may not see me, but I promise you there's nothing between you and me but this microphone. And space. And time. And I can make this rhyme. For no reason, because we're starting with simple magic. The novels progress from there, and I'll get into it, but book 1 is a special case, and I just need to take a little more time with that. Not going to get into the specifics of each book, because I have a separate chapter already. As I uploaded each book, I spent hours talking about each, and those speak for themselves, but running the spectrum here of the rainbow, coming full circle, doing a full arc of the story overall. These things, it's a labor of love, arguably my most passionate, most dedicated work of my life. What I think is my best reflection of myself and what I could do. Doesn't start off so well, but that's by design. Going into it, I knew I was exploring this world, so I went with an amnesia plot. The displacement is shared by myself and the audience. It's all meta, as they say nowadays. I figured no matter what I did, tonally it was going to change as I got to know the world, so just make the first book a little chaotic and unbalanced, and that's how things usually are anyway. You don't start with paradise and everything perfect, because then there's nowhere to go but down. Entering into the world of adventure, it's discombobulating. It's the Oz factor. Bilbo's going on an adventure. Now, he had a better start than I did, but I avoided doing the Hobbit hole tavern gathering because it was stereotypical. I figure awaken in the woods with amnesia. And what's this medallion? What is this 8-pointed star of crystal? What is... Actually, it was like Jack Skellington a couple years later in The Ring of Trees. What is this? And book 1 is meant to be a standalone story, although, like The Hobbit, is the prelude to a much larger story arc. Now getting into that. Ta. Originally, I was going to write a trilogy. How original, huh? 3 books. And the way they are now, book 1 pretty much is the same as I always intended. It's book 2 that got interesting. Book 2, the story got away from itself and ended up needing to become not 1 book, and not 2, but 5. That's the arc of the War of the Dragonlords. The last book, what is now book 7, and that's a separate story. It's like the 7th lock in Die Hard. It's a whole different story. It's the 7th chakra, the 7th color of the rainbow spectrum. It's the 7th heaven. It's special. And it, like book 1, is a separate story. And that was originally my book 3. It was just book 2 that, like, book 1 was a quest, book 2 was a war, book 3 was a quest. Kind of like Star Wars, or Indiana Jones, or something, or even Lord of the Rings. It's like poetry, they rhyme. In the case of Lord of the Rings, literally, you got the Fellowship of the Ring and the Return of the King. And in the middle, you got that 2 towers, all that dark middle act stuff. But as soon as I began to rough out the story, I quickly realized, ain't no way it's fitting in 1 book. Well, what then? Do I have 4 books? 7? I was always fond of 7. I even had rainbow dice back in the day. 30 years ago, I had my 7 dice at my game table because I always found uses for the 30-sider. I had a crystal white D30, but the other 6 dice, like the books of my story, were each a different color. And I painstakingly shopped to get those sparkly, transparent, magical dice, but all matching, down to the style of the numbers. You know how people can be about their dice. The rainbow was always important to me. The spectrum, the higher mind. And though I didn't realize what I was channeling at the time, every novel ends in the pineal position. I channeled so much in these because they came from a pure place, not from a place of marketing or competition with anyone or for any reason in any way of any kind. So when I expanded the story in 7 novels, well, this is going to take me some years. It just became this thing that I just did in the background that no one cared about. Some people keep a scrapbook or a diary. I just worked away at a fantasy saga with no encouragement, no one wanting to read it. In fact, quite the opposite. Whenever I showed anyone anything from it, they told me it sucked. It was hard. My skin had to thicken. Oh yeah, it hurt. I went through all that. It's like dating. You go through that learning process of hurting. Hobbits leaving the Shire. Gotta learn about life. So, I did. That's all applied in the polishings of the stories decades later. Never changing it from the copyrighted stories of the early 90s. The characters, the plot points, all those remain the same. I just could do better dialogue. I could polish the script and make it more organic, because I had the life experience to go into that. That I retained the idealism of youth and the dragon sight, unclouded, and have since become not chasing the exoteric at the base, but in the true 3 of 3 center, if you perceive it thus. Lord, with my house in order. There and back again, I have returned, come full circle, and can, like a good wise old hobbit, work on my book, and have done so. And no matter how noisy and distracting the world gets out there, I'll keep on working away at it, because, as I said, Book 7 is a separate issue, and that's what I'm spending the next few years working on. No rush. That's going to be my Sistine Chapel. I'm going to take my time. And in the meantime, everyone else can read the story really to its conclusion. Book 7 is just a bonus. Takes place years later. It's one last hurrah. One last quest. Done. Because nothing's ever finished. No pyramid is ever complete. Nobody is ever perfect. There should only be 7 points on the star, but that's for the holy symbol of mortal kind. That 8th point, something to think about come Book 7 long years from now. Teaser there. But I'm already well into it. I know the story. I've lived with it for decades. I just have to chronicle it. The Crystal Chronicles, an alternate title for them. But for some reason, as clunky as it sounds, people like War of the Dragonlords because they like House of Dragons and Lords of this and that. And okay, the title's supposed to tell people what the story is, although it's an exoteric title for an esoteric meaning. But the Crystal Chronicles would be like, what? Or am I wrong about that? You tell me. It's about communication. But really, the overall title is Fantasia in the title of each book. Book 1, The Crystal Quest, is a self-contained story. You don't need to know anything going in. The main character doesn't. Amnesia plot, remember, from page 1. Awakening in the woods. Can't see the forest for the trees. 1. Be centered. And that book is free. I published that for free. Costs you approximately 0 currency. It's just a PDF download on drive-thru. And Lulu. But Lulu is so hard to work with, I can't... They always reject my covers. I can never please their system. So I just gave up on Lulu, and I just do it all on drive-thru now. And whenever... I can always do updates in the future. But that's where things stand as of Fantasia Day 12/28/2022. And that's all I need. Again, I'm not seeking to do some media blitz, even if it's free. I don't have a big anti-social media presence. Think of it as an ancient manuscript, a chronicle of another world, that, like a treasure in that world that most don't know is there. But if you find it, you might find some magic. Yes, a crazy stone person wrote, well, polish these. A child talking to entities and having all kinds of experiences. In addition to those I've listed, stranger things have happened. Vanishing from the schoolyard in '83, dealing with modern-day fairy abduction, yours truly. Yeah, I've been around. So, these books are coming from, not from, I want to be a writer, so I'm going to write what's popular. No, I wrote what I gave a shit about. And that's what you got. What I thought was just, really, I thought was doing my own poor man's token, but I wasn't planning on selling it off on anybody. I was just having fun. But what I was really doing was fulfilling my life's purpose, I guess. So far, you don't know everything. There's always another Horace line, but every book ascending further up the rainbow shock cosmos tree. You see, you can be a Dragonlord too. You just have to ascend your own illuminated pyre mind, Mount Sinai, and be centered more in your circle. Every book ends that way. Book 1 ends on top of a mountain called Crystal Peak. Book 2 ends on top of a necromancer's tower. Book 3 is the equivalent of the Holy Grail atop a holy mountain. Book 4 is a tiered or terraced city or hill fort, like Camelot. Book 5 is the great fiery furnace forge of all the evil bad guys in Fantasia, the lair of the great dragon. Big Mountain. And then Book 6 is the great tiered or terraced city that is essentially the... While the hill fort was the historical Camelot, this would be the fantasy, Victorian, Broadway musical version of Disneyland Camelot. And then Book 7 is the Crimson Towers. Every one of them about ascension. Ritualized so, and I didn't even realize it when I was writing. So much I didn't realize. My rewrite, when I went back to rewrite, I didn't go back to rewrite them in 2014. I was bored, the world was in a dark place, my life was in a dark place, a darker place than I am now. And I was curious. It's like, as I'm studying Freemasonry and such, I remember putting some things in my books that might... Did I channel a Masonic ritual or something? Maybe I should reread the book and see where I put that. And I'm just curious, what did I write all those years ago? My life's gone to shit. I may as well see how bad my work really is. And to tell you the truth, it was still pretty bad. The writing was cringe-inducing. I mean, not bad, given that I was a little green teen, if you will, when I was writing it before. The heart and the story were there. It just needed some love. And I had that to give now. And, well, I channeled more than one Masonic ritual. I channeled all kinds of things. Every page there was a surprise for me out of thousands of pages. And since I'm reading it, I may as well be polishing it as long as I'm here. And here we are almost a decade later. And the story is there. In one part, if you want, like The Hobbit, But if you like that, there's a Lord of the Rings waiting for you in the war to follow. There's the quest, and then there's the war. But they all get that wrapper. It's a subtitle, I guess, not a wraparound. Fantasia's the wraparound title. And even when it gets into war, it's never political, and it's not really much about war. It's always a quest, because that's more fun. Remember, this is approaching it from a role-playing game standpoint, a movie standpoint. This is Tolkien level, not to compare. I'm certainly no linguist, but if you just consider time and resources, I'm a comparable scholar in my own rights to the professor. And well, I smoke like him too. Huh. Not exactly, but like. The finest weeds in the northwest farthing. I like that very much. But my work also is only like Tolkien. It's not meant to be. It has scholarly depth like Tolkien if you look for it, but it's really, at its heart, comes from a more childish spirit. And now, we're talking Star Wars. Yes, I have a Darth Vader in my stories. He shows up in book 3. Before that, there's a few Sith that go down as they're looking for their dude. Remember, I wrote these in the early 90s. But it's all archetypical. And it's not meant to be any great novel. I even hesitate to call them novels. I like to call them books. Like in Tolkien, you know, if you break up Lord of the Rings, it's actually 6 books. Because that's how they'd refer to it in the Middle Ages, or in a medieval world, if you will. Stylized fantasy medieval world with that pseudo-medieval game talk. Table talk. Armchair Shakespeare thespians, you know. Exit couch left. But that's fine, because it's fun. The spirit of my books, the style, is much more Star Wars, even though exoterically it looks like Tolkien. I take a lot of time purple prosing my way through the pink petals of Bombadil's garden. I have flowery prose and purple prose and everything else growing around there. I'll take time with songs, and I have riddles, and I do all that weird medievally fantasy Shakespeare-y wannabe stuff. But it's not Tolkien. It's Star Wars. It's not even medieval. It's more superheroes. It's the Avengers in a medieval world. Because that's really more what it is in Lord of the Rings when you really look at it. At least the movies. Tolkien, he is more classic fairy tale, but that's what these stories are. Look at Beowulf. Actually, my stories are probably a bit more Beowulf than they are Tolkien. To just high adventure, high fantasy. People in the past liked their superheroes too. The Greek gods, the Nordic heroes, Thor and Hercules and such. These are no different. Well, we still got Thor today. Avengers Assemble. No difference. You could throw the biblical characters in there too. Moses, Jesus. Same thing. Did I just lose some people? Oh, you've little faith. Oh, you hung around. Good. It's interesting that my fantasy world is, despite all my interest in UFOs, totally technological and alien and interstellar free. It's a flat Earth, and there is one God with angels, and there's a devil, and it's a very Christian world. Although I never cite any specific scripture. Well, I do actually quote scripture, but hold on here. It's a fantasy world. I tweak the scripture. Don't tell me it hasn't been done for thousands of years. How many versions of the Bible are there that you know about? It's like adapting a book to film. I keep the spirit of the writing, but I tweak it to match the Fantasia dialect, the style the characters speak in. And I don't ever cite chapter and verse, because I'm not referring to the Bible. I'm taking the wisdom of the passage and giving its Fantasia equivalent. I don't refer to the Bible, I refer to the Holy Scriptures. For example. You get what I'm saying, and if you know your biblical scripture when I cite passages, which will be italicized, they'll be easy to spot, but you'll have to know the chapter and verse on your own. Or I suppose you could just type the text in your search engine and it'll pop up. Whatever. But I'm not doing it to be Christian. If anything, I'm at odds with Christians more than I'm on their side. But historically through my life. But to capture the mood of the world, I wanted that Arthurian medieval feeling, and you can't do that without that Christian crusader setting. So, and you know, every fantasy world, even Middle Earth, creates a pantheon of gods, and I could have gone berserk with that. I could certainly have made up a wonderful cast of pro wrestlers. I mean, gods. But it actually goes back to my channeling the truth, that this wasn't about an exoteric story so much. Well, as I went on my own journey, as my characters did through life, it all goes back to source. Highest on that mountaintop. It should be one God in this world to tell the story properly. I suppose it could be told that everyone has to find their own path and therefore find their own God, but that creates sort of a diversity. I like that everything in the end is one. A pantheon is more of a chaotic universe. I like a uniform universe. I believe all the better things are, the simpler they are. That's back to the Hobbit hole philosophy. Buddha Hobbit. Call me Professor Buddha Hobbit. I'm from the village of Budashire. It's like Budapest in your world, but it's Budashire. He's the Dolly Hobbit. If only the fantasy film people hadn't gone all social justice Twinkie. We could be doing like SNL skits with the Dolly Hobbit. Or has that been done? Well, there's probably not that much that's terribly original in my books. And that's also by design. I wanted to be as stereotypical and cheesy as possible. I mean, I mentioned the dragon's lair. Yes, there's a kidnapped princess, and yes, a knight must go and rescue her. I mentioned the Holy Grail. Yes, there is $1 a stroke. I also mentioned my Darth Vader. Who do you think deals it? So, there has to be a Grail quest. I wanted, this is where it's more Star Wars than it is Tolkien. Despite dealing with archetypes, Tolkien was at least being sophisticated. He was being British about it. Let's make proper theater. And that's all to the good. But I have to admit, I wasn't raised in Britain. I was raised in the theater of Star Wars. And it's more like, well, we need a big bad guy in black. Because we need a big bad guy in black. So actually, George Lucas knows a lot more than he was letting on. But his name means light in Hebrew. I've gone into all that before. Maybe he didn't realize how much he knew. Or maybe he did. I can relate to that. Maybe he was intuiting. He even said that himself. A lot of things you do is done out of whimsy. Whimsy or intuition, Mr. Lucas? Well, whatever his path up the mountain, or his mountain, we all return to the same source in the end. I had to find my path. I wasn't content to just read Tolkien and draw a few maps like most gamers were content to do at the time, at best. I was one of the original world builders, and while it ultimately led to my Fantasia game of extensive material, far more bulk text than the novels, sure, but the novels are, as I always like to say, the game world is the TV show. The novels are the movies. And we're talking when it's done right. Say, Star Trek TOS, not TNG. You get me? Hey, and there's even 6 of them. Kind of a 7, but my 7 will be better. Same with Star Wars. It's like poetry, they rhyme. And actually, that was getting into the broader story of the war now, my Lord of the Rings. The Crystal Quest is one complete story, one complete cycle. It ends atop Crystal Peak, in the pineal position, with the 8-pointed star, Crystal Kyber Star medallion. I think you get the point. Now, where do you go from there? Well, there's balance to all things. You have the light, and now you need the darkness. The Grail Quest is book 3. Book 2 is when the darkness has to show up in the world, and is an omen of dark times ahead. Gandalf's got to visit Frodo and speak about things stirring in the east, you know. Got to investigate rumors and legends. And go on the simple, happy hobbit quest to start things off. Simple. Before things get all harrowing and dark and spooky again. Fantasia. The War of the Dragonlords. More war of lore, of perception. The world is what we make it. Whether you deal darkness through the storm, chaos, the black magic of manifestation, the tempest of technology, war. You seek the light of life, of learning, not just of lore, but amidst this war, there is, at its heart, fun, yes, but also love. Yes, it is a multifaceted love story. Spoiler, with a happy ending, at least for some. Characters die. Spoiler. Another reason I liked having more uncertain, not unbalanced, but, or actually deliberately unbalanced, but like this storm at sea or over the lands through the trees, in the cauldron of consciousness. I wanted there to be a certain amount of chaos, balanced with, well, as all things yin and yang. But coming out of that uncertainty, you would find certainty. Such as all the stories tell. That there must be loss for there to be life. There must be balance to all things. And as this is an idyllic world, and I have my Camelot, even my Disneyland, and there is a happy ending for the most idyllic love I could ever compose over 30 years of poetry. If that is my Sistine Chapel, what is Matt DeMille's concept of love? It's in these few thousand pages if you care to explore. But there is also equal loss and grief. Main characters die. And not at the end of the stories. And not just one. Not just poor Boromir. There's a role-playing game element to these stories, remember. The only artistic license I take there is I don't have them die so stupidly. Or unluckily. I write these books as if this was the best game session ever. Where I had the best players who got together like instead of a bunch of pro wrestlers or pirates in competition with each other, they got together like a theater troupe including the director, the game master, and made characters that all would work with each other. And they're more interested in the experience than the experience points. Get the point? And they just really all were so my type of people in real life that they would also be able to use the source, and we wouldn't have to worry about unlucky dice rolls because they'd have greater mastery of things than that. And these novels would be the way I would like to see the game played. Now that's sounding like it's asking a lot, but consider, it's Star Wars, not Tolkien. You don't need to be all that sophisticated. You just need to have your heart in the right place. That's all. Just need to have the right idea. You don't need a lot of skill or experience or preparation. None, actually. All you need is a desire for more imagination. Not just more light, like we say in the Masons, more knowledge. It's more, I'm more this full spectrum, more rainbow, more Christmas lights, more magic. So, again, this is how you can see this is more of an idealized story than it is, look how much history I've studied. I could easily make a long, boring regurgitation of a bunch of droll facts. I can use 100 hours of historical documentaries to inform one paragraph of my novels just to get the alchemy right. Maybe literally if I'm describing a wizard's laboratory or something. I just like to have that authority in the details. But I don't have to draw attention to it. It's not self-consciously historical. It is high fantasy. Dragons fly and attack castles. You gotta answer riddles to pass the magical gates. Tolkien isn't high fantasy enough for me, actually. My favorite part of Lord of the Rings is the Fellowship of the Ring, and particularly the middle of it, from about Bree to Lothlorien, the high adventure role-playing game style, the quest portion of Lord of the Rings. You got the most variety of stuff. You got everything from Black Riders to magical Moria gates. You have Rivendell, you have Balrogs, you've got you got a lot of neat stuff. After that, you got pretty much nothing but orcs and war drums. More orcs and more war. And more warks and, more warks. That works. It doesn't work for me. It bores me after a while. My novels never get into, like I said, they never get into politics. They might have to go talk to the king, but it'll be brief. It'll be which way to the Grail. Which one's the Grail Mountain we got to go to? And then the bulk of the text is the quest through the wilderness to get there. Because that's where the fun lies. That's the Star Wars of it. And the characters. While I never shortchange the characters, I never have them act stupid, not on a gaming level or a dumb movie level, to make the story work. And this is one reason I had the years to invest, take my time and revise it. And this is one thing where the revisions did help a lot, and that was making sure my characters didn't do anything that would be unbecoming of them in terms of wisdom, experience, maturity, design, goal, humor, character, equipment. I kept equipment lists like a proper game for every character, so I knew everything they were carrying. I would gauge their speed and their mileage in my world, which was already all worked out, so it could be accurate. Although for those that play the game, there is a distinct difference between the age in which the books take place and the age in which the game is set. And while it may seem like a relatively small gap of time chronologically, only a century or so, the books take place around the year 1300, whereas the game campaign begins in about the year 1400. And you have long-lived characters like elves and dwarves and dragons and such, to where that's only, a couple of seasons. There's a distinct change in the world, and that is what in large part the books are all about. They're a transitional time between the ancient world and the world of the game. They set the stage for the game. It always bothered me when everyone's being a true poor man's token and just plagiarizing the professor for real. They all follow suit with, well, at the end, the magical people, the elves and such, left the world, and magic left the world and became an age of men. And they do that because Tolkien did it, not understanding why he did it, and therefore not putting any organic justification in their own stories why that happens. It just happens. Well, I always thought that sucked, because fantasy is, we want more of that, not less. We don't want the elves to leave the world. We want more elves. That's why we go to fantasy in the first place, duh. And so I like Fantasia to be a very rich environment. There's elves and dwarves and dragons everywhere. Not to the ridiculous extremes that role-playing games took it for purposes of marketing. Like, you can't go into a market in any town in Fantasia, and they don't have S-Mart in Fantasia where you can buy magic swords, for example. No, that's where it's more like Tolkien, where you got to find them in a troll hole or something. They're rare. So it makes it more special, more fun when you actually find them. Make it worth finding. But they're there. And elves and dwarves will mingle in town. It's a fantasy. It's a typical medieval fantasy world with all the stereotypes, other than a pantheon of gods, I suppose. But I wanted the world to be in the game world, where the stories are the novels are the stories I wrote. The game is the world everyone gets to explore. So I wanted the novels to give birth to the game world, to set the stage for the more colorful world to follow. See, I wanted to justify having more, not less, magic. Well, when you look at a war, one of the many consequences or changes, yang and yin, of a war is that there's a lot of remnants and wreckage left over. If we're going to have a war of dragon lore, those who would hoard the lore and use the worlds as chess pieces for their own purposes, false ascension, the grid, if you will. Well, when they're, of course, eventually the good guys will win. Spoiler. What's left of all the... Like, they manufactured, lots of swords for the armies of the dead. Over time, as Dr. Jones would be told, they would be scattered, sold, dispersed by wars, sold off by thieves like you. You look at World War II, look at all the bunkers that were built, and the old Nazi U-boat bases and tunnels and such. Imagine what the dwarves and necromancers in Mordor could do. Well, give it 100 years or more. And they were building on things that they were ancient and uncovered, and like Isengard in Lord of the Rings. Saruman didn't build it. No one ever explained who built it or when or where they found it. Kind of like the Egyptians found the Great Pyramids and used them. They didn't build them. So, what they are, however, what we have, thanks to things like, well, thanks in quotes, to entities like the Third Reich, who went all over the, Hitler's a nuts on the, Hitler's got teams of archaeologists running around the world looking for all kinds of religious artifacts. So Hitler's a nuts on the subject. He's crazy. He's obsessed with the occult. Okay. Think of World War I and II, the whole thing, but primarily World War II, I suppose, as the war, loose comparison, applicability, and some irony in there. And we're all, as my books, and now we're almost a century later in the game world. And we have the remnants of, the necromancers and the black sorcerers and the bad guys in my world, the Sith Lords in Fantasia, used all this lore of the dragon for basic beast purposes of conquest and control, and all the usual tropes to keep it fun. The beneficiaries are all of you, who come along a few generations later, and here's not a troll hole, but where's this old? It's not a Nazi bunker. It's a haunted castle. It's like in Ghostbusters. The Twinkie got very big, and then I guess it got scattered all over. Zombieland. Where's the fucking Twinkies? Although for note, both Bill Murray and Tennessee are Epstein Island visitors. Sorry to say. But so Spielberg, and I still wear my Indiana Jones. I wore it the other day down to Budashire market for my herbs and goods. So, Fantasia is meant to be the ultimate solo role-playing game experience, in a way. For me, this is the way I'd like to see it, although I deliberately set it in a different age so people in the game could, and those who enjoy the novels, could not make comparisons. I deliberately set apple trees and orange groves apple orchards and orange groves next to each other. It's beautiful as the seasons change here in the Shire, Budashire. So the novels exist in and of themselves to be a classic fantasy adventure experience. Plain and simple. Like Tolkien, no more agenda. And I learned that about Tolkien after I wrote the initial drafts back in the early 90s. But the benefit is they set up the game world, and that's not a plug. That's just the history. That's what I did. That's why I did it. That's what these are all about. And that's the tone of the books. Even though my far greater work, even than the game, in terms of sheer body of work nowadays, is what I've done on this microphone. Breaking down all the esoterica of Hollywood with movie commentaries and such, which are all for free, by the way. You would think someone like me with this much history at his command would have the longest, most boring novels you could imagine, especially with all the time to work on them with no deadline, no pressure, and let's not forget how long-winded I am, getting to the point. No, I want these to be me at my... These books are me at my best. The time taken on my part writing them is to make sure that I don't waste any time of yours. I'd spend a whole day on one page just to make sure that page was damn good and got to the point and didn't waste words. Oh, sure, I'll take time leading you down the Purple Rose path to Bombadil's Ginger Petal House, but that's because that's part of the experience. Back to every popular film franchise or any fiction. You're on a tour through the world. You look at any one of them, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek. These are all worlds people want to live in. Well, at least until recent decades when Hollywood got a hold of everything. Another benefit to my books, if this is what you're looking for. Well, I'm sure these big dragon TV shows and have impressive special effects and wardrobes. I don't know. They got the heart of the child preserved over 30 years with all this esoteric wisdom and whimsy in there just to give you a pure fantasy story that's not so dark and defeatist as they all give you these days. No, this is good old-fashioned Dragon's Lair, Dark Crystal, Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Star Wars. Have fun, adventurer. Your quest is Dragonfire. Ah! Did I mention whimsy? Oui. There's humor. There's tragedy. There's love. There's evil. Actually, there's not so much evil as there is chaos and order, darkness and light. I keep it ambiguous. It's playing more with concepts and symbols than it is any dogmatic definitions. Again, no Bible verses. Just the words of wisdom leaving you to think of it however you do. Your Fantasia. I say welcome to my world, but it's your world too. It's designed that way from the beginning. Even though I legally own it, yeah. And I do charge for book 2 onward. And, the people down in Budashire, they need coin for the herbs. But remember, book 1's a standalone story, and it's free. Full novel, years of work for free. I think that's pretty good. If you like it, there's a lot more. That's on you. I believe in capitalism. Oh, these books are decidedly more American than British. The knights are not very knightly in the traditional English sense, or European sense, or anything sense. They're more like superheroes or pro wrestlers. They're American knights. They're more Jedi than they are Arthurian. They're gamer knights. 1001 gamer knights. So, it's getting dark and stormy out there. As in the books, the age of darkness is upon us. Another reason I release the books at this time. I feel it is time. And book 6 has been done for years. I could have released him any time along the way, or saved him. But no, I feel the time is nigh. The time is appropriate. The energy is high. As am I. Now to bid you, as I did welcome, now farewell, adventurer, questor, ask what questions you will. If my books help you do that, great. If not, seek ye your own journey, your own Horus lines, your own mountain, your own truth. But if you seek it here, this last bit's Fantasia. See what you see. If it makes sense to you, it's correct. No promises, though. There's equal light and dark. It's a journey through a better world, a better physical environment, a better social environment, a better spiritual place. But for that must come equal contrast to darkness, so you can appreciate the light. If you seek to see, be yourself master as a dragon, lore thereof. Read on, adventurer. Your question awaits. Follow the Kadysses in your own heart, and the source